Hey everybody, just gonna get my iPad set up, look at my notes. Just came in from the front porch. I've been talking about that recently. These slow, easy, chill out moments that we've afforded ourselves right now as we're staying in place and staying at home. Doesn't have to be a long time. For me, it was just 15 minutes. I set up this little camping hammock, this backpacking hammock that I've rarely used on backpacking trips, and set it up on the front porch to read a little bit more about our guest, Dr. Cleavon Gilman, who I will introduce in just a second. I was reading an article about him in Al Jazeera in the hammock, and then my daughter Molly jumps in the hammock as well, and she starts talking about the house that she is going to buy, and it's going to be on a farm, and she's going to have a little house for me in the back, and I will help her take care of all the animals that she's going to have on this house / farm. There's going to be goats, there's going to be horses, there's going to be different kinds of birds. Anyhow, great conversation. Just came in from that and turned on the radio listening to the Fox 92.3 here in El Paso, and about to welcome Cleavon Gilman on. And I'm going to post something here and pin the comment so that after you have a chance to hear him, if you did not see him last time he was on, you can go to this link right here. That's his website. This guy's amazing. He is a New York City emergency room doctor. And depending on your temperament and just what you're made of, that is either the last place that you want to be and the last thing that you want to be doing, or that's the first place that you want to be and everything that you want to be about. And in the case of Dr. Gilman, it's the latter. He wants to be there right on the front lines, right in the thick of the worst pandemic to hit New York City since, I guess, 1918, but certainly the worst in our lifetimes. And he's writing about his experience on almost a daily basis at this link below. That's where I got turned on to him and really inspired by his service, his courage, his sacrifice. He's a combat medic veteran, served in Iraq, and now works in one of the hospitals in New York that's getting hit so hard by this surge of coronavirus cases. We're going to ask him about that, and we're going to take your questions. There's a little question box right here at the bottom of the screen. If you hit that, ask a cogent, relevant question, I will call on you and repeat your question and then ask Dr. Gilman to respond. Couple of quick points first that I want to raise. When we were finishing our wonderful conversation with Jack last night, and Jack, thank you for being a part of that yesterday. So inspiring and gave me a lot of hope and optimism about what is yet to come. I told you that we were about to start a 2-hour phone bank. And that phone bank, I was joined by 70, 75 other people who called folks in El Paso, Texas, my hometown, where I am right now, to see if they would volunteer at the food bank. And so we made thousands of phone calls. We signed up, I think, over 100 volunteers who committed to working shifts at the El Paso Food Bank. As you know, historic demand and need. A lot of people unemployed, a lot of people having a hard time feeding themselves, feeding their families. We want to be there for them, but the El Paso Food Bank and food banks across Texas just don't have enough volunteers to put that food in the boxes and put the boxes in the trunks or in the beds of the trucks that are coming through from people who need the help. So we were making these calls, which was great. We had a lot of fun doing it. And then today, Amy and I went in to work a shift at the food bank from 8 a.m. to 12:30. And it was great. We were on an assembly line where Amy was in charge of onions. I was in charge of tomatoes and then jalapenos and then bell peppers. You'd bag them, put them in the box, move it down the assembly line to the next person who was at least 6 feet away from you. We were wearing masks. We had gloves on our hands. They checked our temperature before we walked in. Safe environment, but really hard work, but really necessary work. Well, the point of my story is that one of the first people that I met when I got to the food bank was this guy, Alex. I said, Alex, how did you hear about the need to volunteer here? Why did you sign up? And he said, well, one of your volunteers called my wife last night and convinced her to volunteer. And what that meant in our family is that she then turned around and asked me to go in this morning at 8 a.m. So he was giving me this look like, thanks a lot, Beto. But I worked right next to him throughout the entire shift, and he was just gung-ho the whole time. You could tell it was very fulfilling for him. So if you're interested in working one of these shifts, if you're interested in donating to the food bank, you can go to our website. It is poweredbypeople.org, poweredxpeople.org. And you can sign up and we'll get in touch with you. We'll call you or email you and sign you up for a shift. A couple of numbers before we get Dr. Gilman on. This is what we're looking at globally now. Over 2 million cases, over 133,000 confirmed reported deaths. I think Dr. Gilman's going to talk to us a little bit about that, about the gross underreporting that is taking place right now. But this is the best data and information that we have right now. In the United States, according to the Centers for Disease Control, 619,607 cases, 27,760 of our fellow Americans have died of COVID-19. This is officially reported. The true number is likely much higher than this one. 3.1 million tests. Better than 0 tests, not as good as 327 million tests. We need more tests, and we need to continue to press those in positions of power and public trust to do that. 15,000 plus cases in Texas, 369 of our fellow Texans have died of COVID-19. Again, not enough tests. We are testing at the worst rate in the country. Fewer people have been tested per capita in Texas than any other state in the union so far. Let me show you this. The headline from the Financial Times COVID-19 tracker is, in the UK and US, daily deaths may be plateauing. We're right at around 2,000 deaths, but it is leveling off, which is better than continuing to spike and to go up. And also a lagging indicator, because as we'll see from this graph, these are cases. So previous graph was deaths. These are cases. Cases are starting to plateau or maybe even come down a little bit in the United States. Good news, but certainly nothing to allow us to keep our foot off the gas in terms of getting enough tests, getting enough PPE, getting enough ventilators, and certainly shouldn't allow us to leave the home or to get within 6 feet of another person, or to stop taking the precautions like washing our hands obsessively all the time, everything that all of you have been doing. All right. Dr. Cleavon Gilman is an emergency room physician in New York City. I learned about him by reading his daily journals of what he's experiencing, what he's seeing, and how it makes him feel. And there's a link to these journals right here. I highly, highly recommend them. We had him on this Instagram show a couple of weeks ago, and it was so illuminating to hear from somebody on the front lines, to understand what's happening in New York City, the hotspot for coronavirus in the United States. So I'm going to try to bring on Dr. Gilman right now. Ask your questions in the little question box, and I'll try to get to them. Let's see. I'm pressing the button and it is flipping my camera around. Let me see if I can get there. Here we go. There we go. Okay, he's coming on. All right,
hey,
Dr. Gilman.
How you doing?
I am doing really well. Everybody wants to know how you're doing. You're in the thick of this in New York City. Yeah. How are you feeling?
Whoa, it was I think when we last talked, there were a few changes, right? We last talked about 2 weeks ago, and there were only 1,000 deaths here at that time. We are now at 10,000, including the new presumed COVID cases. I had a hard week a week ago, after we had talked about how to process, how to manage the deaths and the emotional toll it takes on me. I had a few hard shifts, and it was pretty rough, but I'm back. I'm strong. I'm feeling good now. Yeah, just wanted to talk about what's happening out here in New York City.
One of the things that I saw you tweet about recently was the undercount that has existed probably everywhere around the world, but certainly in New York. The death toll was just revised upward by 3,700 people, which puts New York over 10,000. Give us some kind of indication of you probably can't speculate on what the real number is, but from your experience and those who are counted as COVID-19 patients and those who are not, Can you talk about what that discrepancy looks like in your hospital or in other hospitals where you have colleagues working right now?
Right. We had talked about this 2 weeks ago, how there were a group of patients who were at home, who were dying at home, that paramedics here said that they would arrive on scene and the patient would have passed away pretty early and not been brought into the hospital. I'm glad that those patients are now being accounted for. So that's a group. And pulling up the info here, it looks like there are 825 of those included in that 3,700 group. They've also included 2,258 as well of patients who presented to the hospital and passed away pretty early on, or did not have a positive COVID test. Now, we know that this test has a high false negative rate, so it's not unusual to swab a person and then it's negative, and then you swab them again, it's negative, and then it's finally positive. We as providers don't really need a test to tell us if a patient has this virus. It presents in a pretty unusual way with the hypoxia and the rapid decline in the patient.
I just read a Al Jazeera profile of you, and you were just referencing the emotional toll that this has taken on you. In the profile, they talk about the fact that on a given shift, you will be involved in intubating 2 to 3 patients. You have folks, as you walk into the hospital to begin your shift, who are in the hallway waiting for an ICU bed. They're being given oxygen. Your colleagues are taking care of them the best that they can, but literally just don't have the capacity, the bed space, to make sure that they're given a bed. There's a scene in that article where you are with a patient who needs to be able to talk to their children, perhaps before they die, or perhaps you know what's going to happen to them. And you use your own cell phone and you put that cell phone up to the patients so that they can hear their child and talk to them. And then you talk about what it's like to lose somebody and to have to call their family, which is when they hear you on the line, they know exactly what you're about to say. And how after you finish that call, the hardest thing in the world you have to do is get up, go out there, and then take care of the rest of your patients. How are you enduring this? How are you surviving this? How do you have the drive to get up and do this day after day?
I think it's my family. It's also all the support I have on Facebook as well, the people that keep me hungry to keep on talking about this. Last week or the week prior to that, it was like 5 shifts back to back to back. And I was calling 2 to 3 families per shift and telling them that their loved one was not going to survive. That's a lot harder than, I think, being in Iraq, where, I treated people out there, young men, but I never had to deliver this bad news day after day after day after day. And it was just a bad deja vu that I was getting. I would call up. So I've done 2 things. One is I've tried to talk to the loved ones and see if they want me to tell their loved one anything. So I've been pushing the phone against their ears. I've been putting them on speakerphone, and I've been putting them on a FaceTime as well. And let me tell you something. It brings chills. It just brings chills. I had a patient that wanted to talk to his father, who was very critically ill. I put him on FaceTime. He told his father that he loved him, and was just crying. And then a few minutes after that, his father just he passed away. And this has happened on multiple occasions in the ED. I think that these patients are just waiting to hear something from their loved one and that they can go. So I'm just trying to provide I'm just trying to provide the best care in the last moment of these people's lives.
Let me ask you a really urgent, big picture question.
Yeah.
One that I've seen you write some about. Why are Black Americans dying at a greater rate than white Americans of COVID-19? In Chicago, Black Americans represent 30% of the population. There's 70% of the deaths. It's very similar figures in the state of Louisiana. Why is that happening?
Yeah, so I think that's just the structural racism here in the country. We've minorities in general have been marginalized. We know that Blacks and Puerto Ricans have higher rates of asthma as well too. There's also food deserts in these places where you can't get healthy groceries. If you don't get healthy groceries, you eat fast food, you get heart disease, diabetes. A large majority of these people as well live in the housing projects, which prior to this were notorious for not having, for being flooded, for not having sanitary conditions. So you can imagine if you lived in the housing projects on the 20th floor and you had to take an elevator and you were ill and you were on the elevator and you touched a button or so, it would spread all throughout the housing projects. And what we're seeing here in the Heights is this virus is tearing through the community. It's killing parents, grandparents. It's just horrible. And we really don't have a great control over it at this moment.
I'm going to bring up some questions right now. And as I scroll through them and look for one, I'll just ask you a quick question that I saw come in through the comments. What about that hospital ship that we heard about? Is it being put to use right now? Is it still docked in New York? And is it seeing patients? And does that relieve some of the demand that you have at your hospital?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that hospital ship. I do know, like, early on, they had planned on not having any patients who had COVID, but everyone has COVID in New York City, so that was a real, that was not a real good marker. I don't believe our hospital has transferred anyone over there. It's a very cumbersome process. So yeah, I haven't heard anything about that. The place where I'm at, though, however, has done a few things. They've created a part of the ED is and now in ICU. So all the patients who are on the ventilator are in that area, and that just relieves us in other parts of the emergency room.
Angie asks, are patients recovering? We hardly ever hear about them. So when folks come in, let's take a vulnerable population, those over the age of 70. When they come in, they need oxygen. They're having a hard time breathing. How many of them are recovering? And maybe as a percentage, or maybe just anecdotally from what you're seeing.
Anecdotally. So there's two types of patients, right? There's the patient that is having trouble breathing and has to be intubated, and there's the other patient who's having trouble breathing, however, is able to be relieved with oxygen and a non-rebreather. The patients who are not intubated, who are just on oxygen, they're getting out of the hospital in 4 to 5 days. So okay, that's great. So that tells us that we should probably hold off on intubation if possible, not putting in a breathing tube. The older patients, however, I'll give you an example because I love this example. If I were to have you breathe 10 times in 10 seconds, if you try that out with me, for that long, breathing 60 times a minute, you would get very tired. And so younger patients are able to compensate for a longer period of time. However, the older patients who are 70 years old and 80, they can't keep up with that breathing rate. And so they have to get intubated. This patient is not getting off of the ventilator though. They're very weak, and so they're just not getting off of the ventilator.
Ella asks, I'm a nurse returning to the critical care area after maternity leave. How worried should I be about coronavirus? And I can't see the rest of the comment, but I think we get the gist of her question. Do you want to take that one, Dr. Gilman?
Yeah, no, you should be very concerned about the coronavirus. You should treat. I would tell all people in every hospital to have on an N95 mask, goggles, and as an example, there was a young nurse in Florida, 33 years old, last week. She was an ICU nurse, and she had passed away from the coronavirus. So it's a real concern. We have to prepare for it. It's a Trojan horse, as I've kind of talked about earlier. It kind of hides in people. But yeah, you should be very concerned about this.
Here's a question I hear a lot. I'd love to get your take on this. Are people who have had COVID-19 and recovered, are they immune?
I don't know about this question. Yeah. This is the great. So this question has great implications, right? Because if the patients are immune, right, then we could possibly test the patient's plasma to see if they have antibodies against it, and then those people can get back to work and hopefully get our economy back to the place that it needs to be at.
And what about any treatments or research on treatments using blood, plasma, or platelets from those who recovered from COVID-19? Anything you can share on that? Any indications of what that might look like for a vaccine or a cure or a treatment?
Yeah, we're currently we're currently trying to get immunoglobulins, which are the antibodies against the virus from people who have been infected with it. So hopefully that will be used in the future. However, it's too early on now. They're also I think the other thing is a vaccine. A vaccine is not going to happen until 2021. We're not even close to being there yet.
Here's a question I love to read. This is a great story. Pit Bulls and Gravel is heading to Flushing, Queens Saturday from Fort Worth to work in the emergency department. Suggestions for best practices. So for someone coming from Texas to the epicenter of this in the United States, in New York, how do you want them to be prepared? And first of all, I want to thank the person.
I was going to do the same thing. I was going to do the same thing. Thank you so much for volunteering to help us out here on the front lines. We really appreciate it. Things to do is I've stopped. I talked to you about this before. I've stopped drinking. I train my lungs. Things to do though is mentally prepare yourself. You are going to walk into a war zone. You're going to see things that you have never seen before. You're going to see young patients who are critically ill, people who probably look just like you. At times you'll probably feel helpless as well. So that's just something to think about when you volunteer out here in New York. It's going to be a life-altering experience. It may even bring up the PTSD as well.
Okay, so that's interesting. There have been two questions that touch on what you just said. One has asked about PTSD-like symptoms, something you're going to be familiar with because you served in Iraq. You're now serving in an emergency room in the center of this COVID-19 pandemic. Are you seeing instances of PTSD or something akin to PTSD? And then second question, someone asked, how has this changed you?
It's a great question. So when I was in Iraq, when I was in Iraq, our camp got mortared a few times, and as a result, when I came home from Iraq, I could not be out on the 4th of July. Those fireworks just brought back horrible memories for me. Similarly, choppers as well. If I hear choppers, I think of like battlefield casualties being brought in, young men screaming and putting them into body bags. What's happening here is the sirens of the ambulance every 10 to 20 minutes. It's incessant. It happens all the time. I'm sleeping and I hear that. And like every time I think of that, I think of the critical patients who are being brought into the ED, the person who's going to be in that chair to tell a loved one that their mom or their grandparent has passed away. So it's beginning right now, I would say.
One of the things you write about in your journal entries is how important running is for you, both for your physical health and just for your state of mind. Are you still running?
Yeah, I'm still running. A little bit less the past few days. I've been trying to raise awareness, so I've been a little bit busy with these interviews and talking to people. But I need to keep running. That is a great point.
I'm so glad that your voice is out there. I loved the recent article in Al Jazeera. I follow you on Twitter and on Instagram and on Facebook. I read your journal. It really removes this from just the headlines in the news or just the numbers that I read in the newspaper. And it makes it a very personal experience because you're just very open about what this does to you. You mentioned hearing those sirens all the time, what that does to you. You mentioned what it's like to be with somebody as they take their last breaths, and then to turn around and call their children and let them know that this person who raised them and loved them and has been with them every step of the way is now gone, and they couldn't be there with them. You just are my all-time hero, and everyone like you who's doing this work right now. This country is so fortunate, and I just want to do everything I can to encourage you and to help share your experience so that we all know how lucky we are and the debt of gratitude that we've incurred by having you and others like you at the front lines. What are your thoughts on some national policy considerations? One of the questions that came in was, do you think it's wise for the country to reopen on the 1st of May? If so, or if not, what are the criteria we should be looking at before we reopen?
Right. There were 2 times that I've kind of jumped into the media spotlight. The first time was, so I'll just begin with that. I have a special obligation as a physician. I'm obligated to prevent the spread of disease. The first time I jumped into this media platform was when I heard those kids on spring break in Florida, and they said, if I get corona, I get corona. And they were just having a great time and spreading it in Florida. The second time I got involved, and I felt like a moral obligation as a physician, as a human being, was when Trump said that he wanted the pews filled by Easter. We are not going to be able to open the economy up by May. That's just not going to happen. We're looking at August. We're looking at July or August or something like that. That's not going to happen in May. What's going to happen is if you open up the economy, there's going to be people there's going to be a group of people who get infected, and they're going to spread the disease all over, and we're going to begin right where we were weeks ago, and we have to do this all over again. The only way to stop this disease is to prevent it from ever happening. So being in the house, until we have like antibodies to treat it, immunoglobulins, until we have a vaccine, we really don't have a strong approach to this virus. It's shut down the whole world. What makes us think that we're going to be able to open up the economy in May? It's just ridiculous.
It's arbitrary.
Yeah, it's an arbitrary number. And so what needs to happen is that we need to test everyone in the US. We need to go block to block, city to city, town to town, state to state, and see who has it and who does not have the virus.
It's interesting. We were laying out the numbers at the top, and you have more than 3 million tests out there, which, in context, that's better than 0 tests. It's nowhere close to the 327 million tests that you'd want to have to be able, as you just suggested, trace the contacts, which has been one of the most effective ways from what we've learned and how other countries have been able to stop the spread, to keep people from dying and to stop new infections. 2 quick questions, and then anything you want to close with. First is, how are you doing on personal protective equipment, the gloves, the masks, the visors, the gowns? They keep you and your patients safe. And then how is New York doing on ventilators? Those two questions, PPE and ventilators. How are we doing?
Right. So PPE at my hospital, I've always had PPE. We have excess PPE. We got hazmat suits now. We got visors. We have all the PPE that we need at my hospital. My hospital has done a great job. I talked about weeks ago. I can appreciate this from a war standpoint, how they've adapted to the virus. Ventilators. That situation has changed a bit. We have ventilators here, but what's kind of changed is, as we've learned more and more about the virus, those patients who are older, a lot of them have been changed to DNI, or comfort care, because we know that if they're placed on a ventilator, that they're not going to have a good outcome, and that it's also very painful to be on a ventilator. I talk about that in my article as well too, right? You have to have a breathing tube. You have to get your blood drawn every other hour.
Your vocal cords are paralyzed, right?
Exactly. Your vocal cords are paralyzed. You wake up on the ventilator, sometimes agitated. It's a very painful process. And if it's a futile process, well, then should we even be doing it in certain patient populations? So that's my take on that. Can you hear the people outside, or it's 7 o'clock?
No, let me listen.
I got to open up the window. Let me
open up the window. Take your computer or your phone out the window.
You can hear it now.
I can hear it.
Yeah, so that happens every day at 7 o'clock. And you know what? I want to bring up a great point about that. And I want to bring up a great point about that as well too, because when I came home from Iraq in 2004, no one cared. No one cared I was in Iraq. It wasn't on the news. There was no parade. No one cared. And so now the country is invested in this process. Look at that love we get out there every day at 7 o'clock. People plan for that. They say, oh, in a half an hour, I'm going to get my pot and pan and I'm going to start banging out there for support. And that's some love right there. That rejuvenates my soul. That gets me so happy. So
I love it.
You know,
I love it. That is awesome. And it is so good, again, to know that you are out there. And then it's so good to know that others appreciate that you're out there. And I asked you at the outset, how do you keep the drive going? How do you keep your energy up? How do you keep going back? You answered it in part right there. I mean, a lot of it is you and who you are and your strength and your courage. But to have New York City behind you has got to feel really good.
It's unbelievable. We are in this together. I can't beat this virus. You can't beat this virus. Only as a country can we beat this virus, and we have to be united against it. And that's what's happening here. And it's just wonderful.
Dr. Gilman, any closing thoughts?
I think that's. I think we closed on that. Yeah, I kind of hit all my topics. Until 2 weeks from now. But just very importantly, you said earlier that there are 369 deaths in Texas from the coronavirus. I just recall like us talking 2 weeks ago, and there were 1,000 here in New York City, and now we're at 10,000. So, it can exponentially grow. So just everyone, please stay inside. Stay 6 feet apart. We appreciate it. Thank you so much, everybody.
We will keep it up. We are all behind you, and we're all cheering you from El Paso, from Wyoming, from Washington State, from all over the country and all over the world. Keep it up. You're our hero. Thank you, Dr. Gilman.
For sure. I thank you so much, everybody. Peace.
Peace.
All right.
Oh my gosh. I certainly feel a lot better about our prospects knowing that Dr. Gilman's at the front of this, and just incredibly generous on top of everything that he's doing. He spends a half hour with us answering our questions and sharing his perspective on what's happening in New York City and what we might be able to expect in Texas or wherever it is that you live. Thank you, Dr. Gilman, for being on. Tomorrow, I'm super excited about this, but this is Shannon Watts. She is the founder and the leader of Moms Demand Action. And she's just one of the heroic figures in America today. Her ability to organize everyday people across this country, Democrats, Republicans, independents alike, folks who may not have any political affiliation or previously did not care about politics, to effectively change our gun laws to save the lives of our fellow Americans. It's just one of the best stories in American politics today, in American public policy. She had a recent big victory, or Moms Demand Action, or those who believe in gun sense, had a big victory in Virginia where Governor Northam just signed into law universal background checks and extreme risk protection orders. And you've got to know that those Moms Demand volunteers and volunteers from the other organizations from all walks of life had a lot to do with helping to elect those in the legislature to pass that, and then to hold them to account until they did. So we're going to talk to her tomorrow, get her perspective on what's going on in the country right now. Please tune in. You're not going to want to miss this. And then Friday, we've got Colin O'Brady, who is, I believe, the first and maybe the only person to cross Antarctica completely unassisted, and lived in isolation in a tent every single day of that journey. So maybe get his perspective on what it means to live in isolation right now. So looking forward to talking to Shannon Watts tomorrow, and then Colin O'Brady on Friday. Hope you guys are having a great Wednesday. Someone in the comments reminded me that it is Whiskey Wednesday, inaugurated by Lisa Delantoni last week. We will return to Whiskey Wednesday next week with Lisa Delantoni again out of Evanston, Chicago. We'll check in on her, and I will just sit back and let her talk for 30 minutes straight, which is the best way we can spend our time. All right, you all be well. Sign up to volunteer at your local food bank if you can. Donate to your local food bank if you can. And go to your local food bank if you need to, if you can't feed yourself or feed your family. Thanks to all our food banks, to all our food bank volunteers, and everyone out there who's been helping out with our effort, Powered by People, to raise volunteers here in Texas for the 21 food banks that serve the 254 counties of our great state. You all be well, love you, and see you mañana.